Cincinnati Inclines, presented by Phil Lind. Phil Lind, I've known Phil for, a couple of decades now. I first met him when we were both volunteering at the police museum, getting that up and running back in the '08s or so, '06. He's a registrar there for the police museum now. He has been a almost lifelong historian of Cincinnati's public transportation. He worked for the Queen City Metro for 33 years, stayed on a little bit more as an advisor. He was the guy who was training all the people to drive the streetcars, so blame him. But in his research in Cincinnati public transportation, he has an incredible amount of photographs. His knowledge is unsurpassed. And usually when we have a speaker, I like to put their photo up here too, but I couldn't find a photo of just Phil. Every photo of Phil I could find online, he's with somebody, usually a group of people. He's the kind of guy people always want to be around. He's the kind of guy who helps others all the time. And he's just a great human being, and I want you to all welcome Phil Lind to talk about Cincinnati's Inclines.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for taking the time out to come out for this program. Such a nice day. You would think people might not necessarily want to be back indoors, but glad to see everybody. So we're going to look at these incline planes here in Cincinnati. Is there anybody in the audience that may have rode on an incline here in Cincinnati? Okay. Right there somewhere? Okay. Well, okay, so that's what the program is going to be about. And let me just get situated here real quick. So before we get right into the inclines, let's talk just for a moment about why we had the inclines, what caused the inclines to come about. And so I'm just going to read a little bit off of here. Cincinnati, we have to think about Cincinnati going back into the 1800s. Some of the things that were going on in the mid-19th century. Fastest growing city west of the Allegheny Mountains. Robust economy, a number of industries. The population in 1860 was at 161,000. And then by the late 1880s, it had increased to 300,000. We also had the distinction of being known as the beer capital of the world in 1880. On the other side of the coin, those were some of the good things. On the other side of the coin, some of the issues and problems that faced Cincinnatians was that we had the most densely populated per square mile of any city in the country. So at times there was as many as 37,000 plus people per square mile packed into the basin area. Cincinnati wasn't a very big city back then. Most of the people, nearly all people, were in the downtown, over the Rhine, and the flat areas. We were second only to New York in miserable living conditions, slums, sanitation, dirty air, and disease. And the surrounding hills were inaccessible, preventing growth and development. Last, almost all the real estate was taken. Business wanted it, people wanted it. There was a lot of tenement buildings, and everything was pretty well just taken, what could be. So that brings us to the inclines. This was a way to get out of that basin area and allow the city, at least it assisted in the city's growth and development. So there was 5 incline locations with 6 inclines that were constructed. First one was the Mount Auburn or Main Street. That was followed by Price Hill, Mount Adams, the Bellevue Incline, and then last was the Fairview Incline. So these inclines, just from looking at these few pictures up there, it basically was rail that was affixed to a superstructure. A lot of it was wood, some metal in there, and they were run up the side of a hill. And basically the elevation in Cincinnati, the crescent of hills surrounding the basin, is about 300 feet in elevation, give or take. So this was a way for people to get out of that basin area to these hilltops. So we're going to take a look at these inclines kind of one by one. The first is the Cincinnati Incline Plane Railway. It was also known as the Mount Auburn Incline, the Main Street Incline. This incline came about in 1871, and construction began in December of that year, and it opened in May of 1872. It continued until 1898, when it was sold to the Cincinnati Street Railway, and they closed it just a couple of months later. It was located at Main and Mulberry Street, kind of lower Mount Auburn, upper over the Rhine, I guess, if you will. And the fellow that built it, or who was involved in the building of it, was a man by the name of George Smith, and he was a bridge builder, and I think he did some work here in Cincinnati. And so he made an investment, him along with some of his associates, to build this. This incline, the length of it was 960 feet. In the rise, the elevation was 312 feet from the base to the top. It had two grades, the angle of ascent. It started off at 35% and then it tapered down to 25%. And it took 1.5 minutes or 90 seconds to make that trip. On the first day that it opened, they carried a whopping 6,000 people. So keep in mind, and I hope I say this in a way, and if there's any questions, please let me know. In these early days, 1871, you had some street railways that were in operation, but they only functioned in the basin area. Cincinnati's hills, if you've ever driven Glenway and Warsaw and Clifton, they're just too steep, and it was too torturous on animals to try to pull horse-drawn streetcars up those hills. So there just really wasn't a good way to get out of the basin. These inclines were the fastest way. There was nothing that could compete with an incline to get you from the base to the crescent of the hill like this in 1.5 minutes. So this is a long view showing the Mount Auburn Incline, or Main Street Incline. And as I said, it went from Main and Mulberry Street, and it went up the hill to what is called Jackson Park at the top in Mount Auburn. You see those hillsides were barren back then. They cut down those trees to build homes and different things. This is what it looked like from Main and Mulberry Street, just a kind of a wooden frame building people would go through. They'd pay a nickel and get on, and then they would be taken up there. They were actually transported in cars that were affixed to the incline plane. So that's how they made their way up there. So one of the things that Smith and his associates did was, not only were they going to make money and get people on top of that hill, but they also decided to take advantage of the fact that people wanted to be on top of that hill, and they wanted to enjoy the view, the clean air, and get away from the everyday life of being, in the basin. Because I think back then people worked 6 days a week. And so they built, where that arrow is, they built a place that they called the Lookout House. And this was quite the place to go to. The building itself wasn't much. It was 2 stories, nothing fancy about it, but they had everything that people wanted, the view and entertainment, things like that. And they also had beer, and that was important to people. They wanted to go out and enjoy their beer. And they enjoyed it on Sunday, even though there were laws that said you couldn't do that, but they kind of ignored all of that. The Lookout House opened up in September of 1872, and it cost $25,000 to build. Later, they added a theater and bowling alleys, and then they built an opera house behind the Lookout House, but that didn't go over too good. People weren't too much interested in going up there for opera, so they turned it into a dance hall. This is over there at Main and Mulberry. The horse car would bring people up. They'd pay a nickel. They'd get on the incline. They'd pay another nickel. They'd get off of the incline, and if they continued on their ride, they paid another nickel. It was outrageous, 15 cents to ride. So by 1875, They had things moving pretty good. The zoo, Cincinnati Zoo, opened that year, and 2 years later they extended the line from the top of the incline out to the zoo. So that was a great thing to do, because now people had a way to get to and from the Cincinnati Zoo. In 1881, they carried 2.3 million passengers. They also decided in 1889, the advent of electric streetcars was beginning that year. Actually, it began in 1888, but in 1889 it was moving along. So they took those fixed cabs off those platforms, and now they ran electric streetcars. So now the ride was continuous from downtown. The streetcar would come up to Major Mulberry, enter the incline, and up it went. And you went from 15 cents down to a nickel. People enjoyed that very well too. More money in their pocket. So one of the things that happened, now this incline carried millions of people, but in that year, 1889, there was a disastrous accident. And what happened was the machinery, these were coal-fired, steam-driven machines, and these inclines had cables. They had a winding, a hoisting and a lowering cable, and they had safety cables. And this was all good. But the machinery to pull these heavy streetcars wasn't very good. They didn't really do anything to upgrade it. And that year, in 1889, they had some problems, so they took the streetcars off, returned to those fixed cabs while they tried to figure out what they were going to do. So what happened, unfortunately, this is a little montage of drawings from the Cincinnati Inquirer. And what happened on October 15, 1889 was a disastrous accident. It was about noon. People were on their way going home for lunch and taking their lunches. And the cars were in operation just like they normally would, up and down. And what happened was, when the car was carrying several people, I think there were 6 or 7, the up car going up to Jackson Park, the incline operator could not stop the car. When he tried to put the brake on, the car kept, the hoisting cable and machinery kept running. And the cab crashed into the head house, and it pulled the cables out of their mooring. So you had a regular hoisting cable, and you also had this safety cable that was supposed to prevent emergencies. Well, it didn't. And so it severed those cables. And that car at the top went careening back down the rails, and it crashed at Maine Mulberry, and it killed 6 people outright. And so the other car, the car that was going down, of course, it fell and made what they call a hard landing. I mean, fortunately, it was almost at the base. Nobody was killed in that. So this was a very, very bad accident. And consequently, they shut the incline down, big investigation. They were going to charge the employees with some kind of a negligent homicide, manslaughter kind of a thing, but that never did take hold, and they finally blamed it on faulty machinery. So we really don't know. It may have been faulty machinery, but we don't know for sure. So they rebuilt it. They closed it down, and they rebuilt the whole thing, spent another $200,000 to do that. And it went from 1889 to 1898 and continued. But people kind of were a little bit skeptical about getting on that incline because of this horrible accident. And the incline people ran into some monetary issues about, continuing with these horsepower lines, and they didn't have the capital to really make it work. So all of that led to, in 1898, the Cincinnati Street Railway, which was a big company here in the city. They kind of quietly walked in and said, well, we're going to buy this incline. And they did, and then they promptly closed it because they were going to run electric streetcars, and incline wasn't necessary. So, the Lookout House, popular place, but eventually the long arm of the law caught up with them, and they said, you can't sell beer on Sunday, you're in violation of these blue laws. And when they quit selling beer, they lost a lot of interest in the place. And eventually they closed it. I don't know exactly when it was closed. I've never been able to really find a date, but the Lookout House burned down mysteriously on March 14th, 1894. And that was pretty much the end of the incline, and it was the end of the lookout house too. Our next incline is the Price Hill incline, our side of town over here. So, let me just bring these up real quick. Whoops, go back one. So Price Hill, 800 feet in length from the base to the top, to the crest. And it rose 350 feet, and the grade was a whopping 44.6 to 44.8% grade. That was the most severe grade of any incline in Cincinnati. So this is one of these very old photographs of it, most probably taken about 1875 when it opened. But a couple of little interesting things about this incline. It was built by the Price family. Reese Price was a prominent businessman over here on the west side of the city, lower Price Hill, if you will. And he had a lumber yard and a brick yard. He also owned property on top of the hill, which was known then as Fruit Hill. There was several different names that the hill went by. And then out by Seton High School, that was a little community known as Warsaw. So the Prices felt that if they built an incline, not only could they make some money with that and get people onto that hill, but they could also sell some of the real estate that they had up there. The interesting thing about this to tell you is, for some strange reason, Cincinnati had annexed this Fruit Hill area in 1870. In 1872, they start to build the incline, but the ordinance reads that they have to tunnel underneath the two streets that crossed the face of the hill. And that was Warsaw, was called the Warsaw Turnpike, the lower Warsaw. And then the upper one, which we know today as Maryland Avenue, was called the Old Warsaw Road. And for whatever reason, the city, I'm assuming it's in the ordinance, the city said you have to tunnel underneath these roads. Kind of crazy, but anyway, they started doing that. Well, they made two attempts at it in 1872 or thereabouts, and it was a disaster. They had cave-ins and landslides. So that pretty much ended that. The city then issued another ordinance that allowed them to go like the Mount Auburn, over the streets, and they could build trestles over those two streets. So the incline, in 1872, they started. They don't get this incline open until July 14th of 1875. They sent out invitations for the grand opening. They wound up with 10,000 people there. So just an unbelievable number of people when you really didn't have any public transportation back in those days. As I said, Reese Price loaned his son, William, the money to build this incline, him and his brother John. They actually, in the early days of this incline, when the passengers were in a fixed cab, they actually put freight on top of that cab and carried that up there. It wasn't a very practical way of doing business. Incline cost about $300,000 to build. 2 years later, they decided that the best thing to do was to build a companion incline right next to it, and they used that strictly to carry freight. It was open platforms, and so horse-drawn wagons could go right onto it. And that opened on April 19th, 1877. At the top, this incline, the Prices built this big structure at the top, and it had a steam elevator, it had an art and music hall in it, and then at the very top was an observation deck, so people could go in there and look at art and hear music and then go up and see the nice view. The Price Hill Masonic Lodge had a couple of rooms in there on a couple different floors, so it was quite a place. The Prices, following the lead of the Lookout incline, or the Lookout Resort, they decided to build what they called the Hill House, and they built it adjacent, just just to the south, I guess, of the incline. And they built the Hilltop House, and it opened up in 1876. They had a bowling alley, outdoor dance floor. They could handle 1,000 diners at a time. The prices also decided and talked about, and they tried to advance the idea of building a 6-story, 500-room hotel at the top, thinking that people would want to come to Cincinnati and get a room and be, once again, be above the clutter and everything and be up there to see things. That didn't go anywhere. They couldn't get the money for it. But anyway, the other thing you may have heard about the Hill House was that Reese Price was a very religious man, and he was adamantly opposed to alcohol. So there was no alcohol at the Hill House. Of course, that was a detriment to people wanting to go up there. Everybody wanted to go up there for the view and for some beer. But he wouldn't have no part of it. That nothing stronger than buttermilk was offered at the Hill House, and so they got the nickname called Buttermilk Mountain. Down at the bottom at 8th and State, there were saloons down there, and they would have signs out that would say first chance, second chance, last chance. So if you wanted to get a drink before you got on the incline, you better do it at 8th and State. Conversely, when you got off of the incline on the other side of the street, it said first chance, second chance, last chance. This entertainment complex, the Hill House, it withstood 3 different fires by 1899. So people got careless and they'd get fires going there. You'd have to, actually, fire companies would have to get on the incline to get up there to fight the fire. In January of 1877, General Reese Price passed on. And what happened was there had been a financial failure in about 1873. The J. Cook and Company had failed on bonds that they were issuing for the Union Pacific Railroad. Consequently, there was a run on the bank. People wanted their money and they couldn't meet those obligations. That started a panic, and it was a national panic, and we went into a Great Depression. And I believe, as a result of that the Price family was involved in some debt to build that $300,000 incline. And so it was turned over to creditors, and the Price family basically lost control to the sisters' nephews that were known as the McDuffies, and they basically took over, or would take over, the incline claim. It all worked out, but it was just a shift of from Prices to McDuffies. As I mentioned, they were fixed cabs. They were red and cream in color. One was named the Highland Mary, and the other one was named Lily of the Valley, in honor of William's sisters. Another thing that the Prices did was they applied for and were granted a franchise to build a horse car line at the top of the hill. So once you got up to the top there at Matson Place, you didn't have any way to get anywhere. So they got the franchise that they could build this horse car line from there out to about where Seton High School is today on Glenway Avenue. They didn't exercise the option to build, but instead sold it to the Cincinnati Street Railway. And they built it and opened it up in 1885. And that ran back and forth from the incline to about Glenway and First Avenue. This was the last horse car line in Cincinnati. And when it quit running in about 1903, that was it. Everything else had been electrified, and that was the last remnant of the old horse car days. And so the way this worked was, if you got on the horse car, you could buy a through ticket. The incline was a nickel, but if you rode the horse car incline and then transferred at 8th and State, you could pay a dime, and the street railway would get 6 of those cents, and the incline operator would get 4. Those of you that with the head house and the horse cars could turn there at the bottom, they had what they call a turntable to get them turned around so they could head back into town. The thing I wanted to mention was the street railway and the incline people got into a bit of a little spat over things, and the street railway owned about 13 or 14 parcels a little bit up on Warsaw, and they threatened to build their own incline. But that was just a lot of bluster, and they never did follow through with that. But there was a big fire in this head house there at the tunnel, and so that changed things, and they rebuilt it. And they put a slant roof, I don't know if you can see it very well, but it went from that turret type style, and it had that slant roof, and it kind of changed the complexion of the building. So the prices are doing pretty good. In 1894, that incline carried a record 1.5 million passengers. That's a lot of people over the course of a year. But the street railway was in the process of extending lines. The horse car lines were given way to electric trolleys. And so Price Hill was on the list to be converted. Actually converted, made an electric line going up Elbron Avenue. And then they built the Warsaw line, which opened up in 1895. Now this view here, to show you how things looked. Oops, I did that wrong. Sorry about that. The road you see down at the bottom of the slide, that looks just like a horse path, that is the Warsaw Turnpike. They called that a turnpike back then. And then when you get up a little bit there where the road widens, that's Wilder Avenue, and then of course you got Warsaw going up the hill. So you can see, when we're talking about some of these roads, they were very, very primitive. Aerial view taken about 1919. And this is the only view I've ever come across that really shows what it looked like at the top of the incline there at 8th and Matson Place. So in the year 1919, the McDuffie family transferred their ownership to a former city councilman by the name of Charles Rose. Charles Rose took over the incline operation, became the president of the company. But what you had at the top of this incline was you had the Hill House, which was renamed the Price Hill House. And then behind it, that almost like a tent-looking structure was called the Pavilion. And so they had silent pictures in there, and they had an ice skating rink and all kinds of various entertainments that were available. So it was quite a complex up there at the top of the hill. The Pavilion closed down about 1920 or so. Here's kind of a close-up to see. I've never found a street shot of that Pavilion, but the house behind it was a Price house, and it's still there today. And then, of course, there was some other houses put in and taken down. And then we're about down at the right side where you see the Price Hill House is the Incline Public House today, right in that area. Let's talk about safety for a minute. How safe was this incline? It was good and safe. It didn't have the disastrous accident like the Main Street incline did. But it did have a bad accident that occurred in 1906. And on the freight side, a couple of guys were taking their loads of manure up the incline. And one fellow, his name was Edward Brisker. He was a farmer, 43 years old. And the other guy's name was Joseph Stossel, and he was only 18 years old. One was behind the other. As they're going up the incline, as the story goes, and when they get nearly to the top, they hear the hoisting cable start to crackle, and it's ready to split. And so it was the original cable from that 1875 era. And so they thought for a moment, at least one of them thought for a moment, should I jump? But he didn't. Neither of them did. And the cable snapped. Well, that started to send that platform down. But there was a safety cable. It didn't stop the car, but it slowed it down. But it still crashed at the bottom. And this is what you see here is a photograph of that accident. The down car, which was still attached, went flying back up the incline. It was on a counterbalance system. It crashed into the head house, nearly killing the incline operator up there. Fortunately, he jumped. This is what happened at the bottom. Both of these guys had presence of mind to flip back into their load of manure. It saved their lives. They came out of it okay. The poor horses, though, were in pretty bad shape. And the officer, the Cincinnati police officer, that was on foot patrolling that beat, mercifully put them out of their misery. The two guys, they were taken out of the manure, kind of dusted off, and marched into a bar for a well-deserved drink. So I believe Brisker, the 43-year-old, of course he died earlier on, but Stossel, who was only 18, he lived, I think, into the 1960s, and he told that story many, many times, and newspaper people were always after him to recount the day that the incline wire snapped. There was some other accidents on the incline that occurred, but there was never anything as catastrophic as the Main Street. Well, there could have been. So in 1926, the street railway started running motor coaches, and one of the lines that they created was called Route D, Price Hill. So they routed Route D, Price Hill. These engines weren't very powerful, and the Warsaw and Glenway were, streets that had 9% grade, so they're pretty tough. So they routed the bus onto the incline, and the incline would carry it up there, and got up there in a couple of minutes. One day, shortly after doing this, the bus was getting on at the top of the incline when the platform slipped away. It kind of left the bus teetering up there. So they took them off, inspected it. Hey, everything's good. A couple weeks later, we put those buses back on there, and it does it again. So the street railway said, we're not going to tempt fate. We're taking them off, and we're going to run them up Glenway Avenue forever. And that's what happened over there. Nice shot of 8th and State. This is 1930. So what happens in 1928, the number of teams, vehicles using the freight side had dropped to less than 100. They couldn't make any money, so they decided they were going to close the freight side. But they did electrify the incline. It was another one of those coal fire or steam-driven things. So the Price Hill incline was the only one to actually go from coal to electricity. And they kept the, of course, the passenger side going. But you can see what it looked like there when they closed down on the right. That was the freight side. But you can see how busy 8th and State, or Lower Price Hill as they call it today, looked. The Price Hill House. Well, it went along until about 1932, and they closed. The George Buddy American Legion Post took up residence there, and they had their meetings and their, various activities, and they would throw parties and dinners, and that's what you see here. This one was taken in 1938, where they advertised New Year's Eve party. After George Buddy moved out, the Church of the Nazarene took up residence there and stayed there until 1948, when that property was sold to WSAI Radio, and they built that big 500-foot tower that's still there. That picture we showed before, 1930, Mother Nature has taken over. This picture is from 1941, so between 1928 and 1941, you would never know that that freight side was ever there. This is what it looked like from the 8th and Matson side, the incline house, and then the freight side there. And of course, today that incline public house would just be to the right of this picture. So we're going to wrap up things about the Price Hill incline. What happens? On July 31st, 1943, incline's moving about just like it's supposed to be, up and down. About 11 a.m., 3 men and 4 ladies were on the incline on a down car. When all of a sudden the incline operator noticed that the rail had spread. So the rails are lined up straight. Well, it had come loose and it had spread. So when the wheels hit that spread, of course it could have potentially toppled that car over the side. So he quickly stopped at about Warsaw Avenue, realizing that there was a serious problem there, and the 7 people on board, nobody was injured, but kind of in an undignified manner, they had to climb down from the incline and climb through those wooden beams and everything to get to Warsaw Avenue. Well, that was enough to call the city's attention to the incline, and so they sent inspectors out, started looking things over, didn't like what they seen. It was old, 1875, it's 1943, and they needed to make some repairs. I should have mentioned too that when the electric streetcars came along in 1895, it cut into the business pretty severely because people didn't have to ride the incline. They could just take a through trip with the Warsaw or Elbron car line. So passenger ridership was down. So this is what it looked like. They found enough things, and they told Charles Rose, you cannot reopen until you make these repairs. Charles Rose said, we're poor. He claimed poverty, couldn't do it. And so that's what things look like. And so they went to the Cincinnati Street Railway, which at that point in time was the prominent or the only transportation system. And they said, we want you to take over the Price Hill Incline and run it. Well, the Street Railway said, we're not going to do it. It's World War II, it's 1943, we don't have the money, you can't get supplies and so forth and so on. And they settled on putting a shuttle bus from 8th and State up to the Price Hill area up there to replicate the incline. And they went for it. People didn't like it. There was a big campaign to save the incline, but nobody had money to do it. That last school year, 1942, it carried 1.5 million and it was down to 457,000 passengers. So it was a considerable drop. This is kind of what it looked like as they started dismantling things. If you're ever driving along Warsaw Avenue from 6th Street, or vice versa from Warsaw, and you look over, you can see there's a couple of those piers that still are standing. But the trestle came down. So there was an organization called the East Price Hill Improvement Association, and they were formed in 1944 to address the incline issues. Now they claim that there was about 800, almost 900 workers that were affected by the closing of the incline. They wanted something done about it. And city council got involved, but again, it all got down to the money. Nobody could come up with the money, and so nothing was really done. But this East Price Hill organization, they bought the freight side head house, and their goal, they paid $2,500 for it, and their goal was to rehab it and make it a community center for youth and recreation center. Well, when they got in there and they started getting the work costs out, it came out to be a whopping $50,000 that it would take to get this place up to the standards that they needed. And they didn't have it. A printer by the name of Grady Printing, they bought the passenger side incline and they were going to use it for their business. I don't know if they ever did or not. There's the 1875 picture. There's the picture in 1948. What a difference. So the incline, they had taken some of it down, but it sat. Closed in 1943. Finally, in 1953, the city came along. Kids were getting into the ruins of it. It was a hazard. Someone could have got hurt or killed. And the city came along and said, we're condemning this property. It's got to come down. And so finally, in the spring of 1953, they tore down what was left of it, as you see it there. And the Queen's Tower went up later on. Okay, our next incline, Mount Adams Incline Plane Railway. This is one that people remember. It opened in March of 1876. It was the last incline to operate, closing in 1948. 970 feet long. It rose 260, the elevation was 261 feet, and it had a modest grade of 29.5%. This is what it looked like in the early years. They had fixed cabs on it. A guy by the name of Shields and Associates, they decided to build it. This was located off of Eggleston Avenue, just east of downtown, and it went up from what was called Lock Street. The Miami and Erie Canal had once flowed through there, and it went up to Ida and Celestial in Mount Adams. It was started in 1873, but again, that J. Cook and Company bank failure jammed them up to where capital wasn't readily available. But they kind of plowed along, and eventually they were able to start doing work, and they opened, like I said, in 1876. Cars attached by cable just like the others. And this is looking up at the top, almost like a dome-like building at the top. It's about the best picture I've ever seen of it. They, like the others, decided that an entertainment complex was beneficial to the business. And so they built what they called the Highland House. And this was quite a place. Very ornate, very nice. Many thousands of people visited rode the Incline, and of course visited the Highland House. They had bowling alleys, they had billiards, restaurants, smoking rooms. They had pretty much everything. You could dance up there. They had a nice pavilion where people could go out and enjoy the view. And it was built at a cost of about $50,000, and it opened up in December of 1876. Political conventions, all kinds of conventions were held at the Highland House.
Did they have beer?
They had beer. They all had beer. Except, well, and I should have said, and I apologize, I'm glad you said that. Let's go back to the Price Hill for 1 second. I told you it was dry, buttermilk. After General Price passed on, the family had second thoughts about that. And so buttermilk kind of took a back seat to beer. Thanks for mentioning that. Jogged my memory. This is looking inside the Highland House, the restaurant. Nice drawing of people outside there enjoying the view. Again, the Highland House, they flaunted this blue law about selling alcohol, and they did it until the long arm of the law caught up with them too. And once that happened, again, people just quit coming up there, and they couldn't sustain the business. They closed it, maybe in the early 1890s. Part of it was used as a classroom, and then it was bought eventually by a company, the Sterling Glass Company, bought the property, they demolished it and built a glass manufacturing company that was up there for years. So we got this incline over here on Eggleston Avenue. It's off the beaten path. It's kind of difficult to get to this place, so they applied for and was given a franchise to build 2 horse car lines, one from downtown to the foot of the incline, and then a second horse car line was built from Ida and Celestial, and they were given permission to go into Eden Park. Eden Park was, just adjacent to Mount Adams, and people wanted to go there, but it was difficult to get there. So by the 1877, they're running these horse cars. There was a valley there at the top on Ida Street, so they built this wooden bridge to carry their streetcars across, called the Ida Street Bridge. One of the things they had in there, since they were a private company, they had an agreement with the city and their ordinances and so forth that if the city decided, now people could use this, they would let you use it. You could run your, if you had an automobile or you had a carriage or something, you could use it. But if the city decided that they wanted to take over that bridge, they'd have to pay the incline company $15,000. They went through Eden Park, and to get further along, they applied for and received permission to construct the Eden Park Bridge across Eden Park Drive. They constructed this bridge on top so that the horse cars could run across. And so they were doing that in 1879, and that allowed them to continue on and get up to People's Corner, and from People's Corner they went out and through the Walnut Hills area and wound up over at Oak and Reading Road by the old Bethesda Hospital. So 3 years later, opened up or 4 years later, I should say. No, 3, I'm sorry. They had to do a remodel. And now they were going to take those fixed cabs off, put platforms on, and run these horse cars through. That way you didn't have to make these transfers. And so they did that. It cost them another $100,000 to do that. So they paid $200,000 for the incline originally, and then they invested another $100,000. And that's what it looked like with one of the horse cars on board. So now it was very nice. Whichever way you were coming from, you had a through ride. So the Mount Adams Incline Plane Railway, private company. A few things up here. So they were the biggest competitor to the Cincinnati Street Railway. And a couple of things they did was they bought the horse car line that went up Gilbert Avenue and paid a pretty good a price for it. But they now had that line in addition to what they owned at the incline. They also were the first company to build a cable car. We had 3 cable car lines in Cincinnati, like San Francisco, and they built the Walnut Hills Cable Road. So it took 30 minutes back then to get a horse car from the casino, Hard Rock Casino, to get up to People's Corner. That was a 30-minute ride on a horse car. So it was a long time, difficult. They had kind of a cash stock transaction that made that happen, but it also gave the Cincinnati Street Railway a couple of seats on the board. This picture taken as they're pulling, this is going up Gilbert Avenue, probably in 1884, 1885, as they're starting to get ready to build that incline. You could see how many horses and mules they've got attached carrying, pulling that cable up. They actually had plans to build other cable lines. They were going to build a cable line over here in the Price Hill area to try to, because the Warsaw was such a steep hill, but never came about. The incline, the Mount Adams people also experimented with electric streetcars, and they actually electrified part of that line on Oak Street. And so they actually brought electric streetcar operation to Cincinnati first. There was a huge rebuilding effort in 1890 so that they could swap out the machinery and have much more better machinery to be able to carry these electric streetcars. And so that was a big project. Oh, wait a minute. And the Rookwood Pottery, I think everybody's probably heard of or aware of it. They built their facility up there at Item Celestial in 1892. It had previously been where the horse cars were kept. And adjacent to that was a big fireworks company called Deal Fireworks. And they were gone by then. So, in 1896, there was a law called the Rogers Law. And basically it said where lines came together, they could be consolidated. I told you that the city, if they wanted to get into that Ida Street Bridge, they'd have to pay $15,000, and they did. They wanted to relieve the incline company of having a bridge like that, so they took it over in 1928, tore it down, and then they built what we know presently as the Ida Street Bridge, and they opened that up a couple of years later. So what did it look like? I've never seen any pictures showing the incline operator. They called them pilots. But here's a view showing the pilot house. The operator would climb up there, and it would be right here. And he would climb some steps, and he would control the operation of the incline from up there. That's an incline operator looking down, so he had the view of everything going on. They used a system of bells. So when the streetcars would be getting ready to maneuver onto the incline planes, they'd get so many bells, and then when everything was on and secure, they had gatemen at the top and the bottom. They would issue 4 bells, and the incline operator would know to start putting the incline in motion. They also had a phone in case an emergency came up, they could call real quick. Engineer on board, because the cables, you had that constricting, and they had to take the cable in, they had to let the cable out, and that was done throughout the day due to atmospheric conditions. This is what it looked like, or part of what it looked like. That machinery was down in the basement, a number of feet below. These are called safety sheaves, that steel cables winding around there. These are the winding drums that took up that cable. And of course, they had people available to do that. This is the head house looking from Ida and Celestial. To the left would have been the former Highland House, now the Sterling Glass Company. And then the Rookwood Pottery would be on to the right. Lower station. I have 1 or 2 color views, I believe. So this is what it looked like in operation. People pedestrians could ride the incline for a nickel. They could walk on, you could ride your bicycle on it, motorcycle. They even had the convertible observation car that would make trips on that incline, which was pretty popular. And then there was a ride through Eden Park. So it went around the Art Museum, across the bridge, and then, of course, went up to the hospital area, and then eventually to the zoo. In between the trips, they would take whatever. They would take cars and small trucks on the incline, and I think the cars were a quarter, and up to a 7-ton truck was 95 cents. Pedestrians were nickel. This is crossing Baum Street. So, as we advance along, we get to 1947. This is that Eden Park Bridge that you've seen earlier. The Park Board, Cincinnati Park Board, owned that bridge. The Street Railway had built the second level and paid some rent. The bridge was in need of repair. That bridge was built, I think, in the early 1870 or so, and so it was in need of repair. The Street Railway, a few years earlier, had repaired their section that they used, but the Park Board wanted them to repair the whole thing, and the Street Railway said, we're not going to do it. We don't think we're responsible for it. Well, the city came along and said, well, we're going to have to condemn the bridge. Well, when they condemned the bridge, they condemned the streetcar route, because that was the only way for the streetcar to get through. So the last streetcar to be carried on the incline and through the Eden Park was on July 25th, 1947. The Street Railway ran the streetcars up Gilbert Avenue. They put buses on to service passengers and residents in Mount Adams. And that went on until April 16, 1948, when the engineers were inspecting the incline, and they noticed that there was some problems with the Mount Adams incline. So the piers, some of them, there was deterioration, there was swelling of joints and things. It was just an engineering mess, or it was about to be. So they closed that incline down. They put up a sign that said closed for repairs on April 16, 1948. Of course, closed for repairs was never to be reopened. They brought in an engineering firm to study this problem, and the engineering firm said, on the one on the left, you could see it says pier leaning downhill and bent leaning up, and the other one, the Baum Street pier, is leaning. These things were dangerously out of plumb, and there was problems with it. It was a disaster waiting to happen. They said, we can repair it for $137,000, or we can build new, the structure from bottom to top, just that, for $141,000, not much more. Well, the Street Railway said they really wanted to be out of the incline business. It would cost them too much. They lost money on every trip that they ran because you had all the personnel assigned to this incline. Plus the city wanted them to quit using coal and switch over to electricity because they had that smoke abatement program that they were pursuing. The street railway in 1946 had carried 132 million passengers. And by 1949, right after the war, 3 years, they're down to 108 million people. They did not view the incline as being a necessary operation. The park board, so this thing was in limbo. There was a big fanfare to save the incline. It was the last one. The park board, in the meantime, by 1949, they said, we're going to go ahead and proceed, and they tear down the Eden Park Bridge. So that pretty much cemented the whole thing with streetcars. So here's how things wound up for Mount Adams. It's sad. The street railway, the city wanted to force them. The street railway said, we'll go to court, we'll sue you. You don't have that right to make us do this. So finally the street railway said, you take it over, City of Cincinnati, and we'll take the first $10,000 in losses, and you can take what they estimated to be about a $45,000 a year operating loss. And the city said, oh no, we're not going to do that. And then the street railway said, we'll give you the incline, you run it. And all of a sudden, it was not a problem anymore. It all went away. And so that was the end of it. They sold the upper station to the Highland House, a group called the Highland House Incorporated. They were going to build a restaurant up there. Of course, they wound up building the Highland House apartments. And things kind of sat there. They tore the machinery out of the basement, those boilers and things. They scrapped the incline pane and got about 500 tons of steel and iron out of that. And this became very, very dangerous. Children would come up here and you got this 20-foot hole there. It was very bad for business. So the city declared it and condemned it. And so it was torn down in 1954. They started scrapping everything. And the only thing left was this little waiting shelter down there at Rock Street by Eggleston Avenue. And that, a guy bought that with the idea of preserving that piece of the incline. And he had that property up until 1974 when the state or the feds decided that they wanted to build I-471 and that was sitting in the way. So that had to come down. If you're interested in figures, this incline used about 800 plus tons of coal. It traveled 14,000 miles a year, 2.10 miles per hour. It was in service for 19 hours a day, 6 trips per hour, and the trips by then, towards the end, averaged about 2 minutes and 20 seconds. I'm going to move on here. Our fourth incline, Cincinnati Clifton Incline Plane. It opened also in 1876. It was part of the newly formed Cincinnati Street Railway Company in 1880. It closed on June 6, 1926. It was located at McMicken and Elm Street and over the Rhine. Went up to Bellevue Park. 980 feet. 395-foot elevation. It was the highest as far as elevation is concerned. And did I say that? The grade was 31 to 42%. That's an artist's rendition of what they wanted the public to see. This was another one of those where those cabs were fixed to platforms and it was moving pedestrians up and down the incline. The owners, the original owners, Cincinnati Clifton, they built the Bellevue House, is what they called it. And this was probably the fanciest of the entertainment resorts. And it was built on the brow of the hill there, what is today Bellevue Hill Park. And you can see it up there on the left. They had a grand concert hall there. It sat on about 10 acres of property up there. They had one of the longest bars in the city. and they had a dance hall and ballroom. The porch went all the way around the facility, bowling alleys, and at one time early on they had a roller coaster up there. This opened up in 1876. By 1890, they were remodeling. They took those fixed cabs off so that they too could use horse cars. The building on the right is the original University of Cincinnati. And they tore down the kind of the house-looking lower station so that they could construct this open station for the vehicles. There's that University of Cincinnati. One of the things that would come up is, after it was UC, the medical college took over the facility. And of course they would, those medical students would work on cadavers. One of the things that they would do from time to time, much to the chagrin of the street railway, was they would hold up body parts as the incline was going by. And of course that would prompt the people on the streetcar, the minute they got home, to pen a letter to the street railway complaining about that stuff. So, what does it say here? Original, okay. 1875, it became the medical school in 1895. Later it became the law school, and it closed down in 1925, and the building was demolished. It sat there for about 10 years, demolished in 1935. There's a kind of a close-up of that Bellevue house up there. And I don't know exactly when it closed, but in 1894 it was remodeled and they made it a car storage facility, streetcars that is. So they claim a good day at the Bellevue house would be 100 kegs of beer. So they would tap 100 kegs. Now I don't, what's 100 keg? What does that mean? Well, if you get your calculator out, 100 kegs would equal 16,500 12-ounce servings. I'd say that any bar that could do that would say that was a good day. The Miami-Erie Canal, which later would be drained and started subway construction, and you can see the Bellevue House over there. Of course, the kids swim in the Miami-Erie. So the Bellevue House caught fire and burned down in March of 1901. Kind of the ruins are at the top. The incline was rebuilt to carry electric streetcars in 1892. This is probably going to be difficult to see, but in the original photograph, there is a stowaway riding on the carriage where that arrow is pointing. And they would do things like that to avoid paying that nickel. They would sneak on, or they would distract the gateman. And I remember a gentleman I talked to at the Price Hill Historical Society many, many years ago saying that him and his friends used to do the same thing. And then when the car would get to nearly to the top, then they would dive off of the thing. I don't know if you can. He's there. So here's you can see over the Rhine, and still here when these electric streetcars are moving, you can see how dense and compact that is down there over the Rhine. The street railway, again, with the electric streetcars, there really wasn't much need for these inclines, and they wanted to close it as early as 1919, but the city kind of balked, passengers balked at it, and so they kept it around. But the one thing that the incline could not do is carry the large, what they call double truck streetcars, the big ones, and that's a single truck car. And so it would have cost an enormous amount of money to, redo the engines and extend platforms. And so finally, in June, they put up a sign that said closed for repairs, and that really meant we're not going to reopen. So that's what it looked like. It closed down in 1926, and in 1927, the city gave them permission to dismantle the incline, and this picture was kind of taken sometime after that. The head house was used as a maintenance facility until it was all given to the park, or sold to the park board in 1949. Okay, our last incline. Fairview Incline McMicken Avenue at Brighton, and it went up to Fairview Heights, the end of Fairview Avenue. 1894 it opened, closed in 1923. It was the only incline that was ever built to carry streetcars. 633 feet in length. 210-foot elevation and a grade of 34%. This would be the lower level at McMicken. This was there was no resort built here. This was strictly utility operation to carry electric streetcars up the hill. McMillan Avenue did not exist at this time up to Clifton, so this was the way up there. This is viewing it from Freeman Avenue, from the Miami and Erie Canal. Close up. And at the top. So there was nothing dramatic about this particular incline. What happened was the street railway wanted to close it. And the residents were really concerned because they felt that if they closed it, there would be no streetcar service to that community. And so they had petitions and so forth and so on took place. Eventually, they had to take the streetcars off because it had structural issues, and people would have to transfer and get on a fixed streetcar body. So finally, what they did was, the street railway they didn't want to expend, a couple $100,000 rebuilding this incline. So what they offered the city was, and the residents was, a proposal. We will build McMillan Street from McMicken Avenue up into Clifton, there at Fairview and that intersection. And in return, we'll spend $85,000 to do that. In return, you, the city, will give us permission to abandon this. You, the residents and riders, will not protest that, and we'll run the crosstown streetcar there. And so they did that, and they built McMillan Street from Ravine on down. And that's what happened there, and everybody was satisfied. That incline closed in 1924, and it mysteriously caught fire a couple of years later and burned to the ground. That, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, that brings us to a conclusion of the program. Hope I didn't keep you too long. Is there anybody got questions, corrections? Yes, ma'am.
I just read an article in Cincinnati Magazine about how the number of fatalities that were caused by streetcars in Cincinnati was more than twice the rate of London, which obviously is a much bigger city at the time in the 1800s. Can you address anything about that?
About streetcar fatalities?
Yes.
Well, there were.
Pedestrians getting hit, struck by them, or, et cetera, losing them, paralyzed, et cetera.
From what I've found in looking at records and newspapers and so forth and so on, is there was a lot of inattention by people out there when they moved to these electric streetcars. And so these, the horse cars were just, kind of plodding along very slow. But these streetcars had some pep and they could move. And people just weren't paying attention. Unfortunately, and I mean, there was any number of serious accidents. I don't have it here, but I mean, on a percentage basis, the number of passengers carried and fatalities, I don't know. Any fatalities, a bad situation, but I mean, there were some caused by the streetcar company themselves, but there were quite a few that were caused by people just walking out into the street and getting hit, unfortunately.
They do that today.
They do that, yeah. Does that answer you, Miss?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Anybody? Okay, thank you so much.